Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Stevenson. I'm bringing you Simon Mitchell. He's the Managing Director of Orpheus Minerals. Now, you may not have heard about Orpheus Minerals. Hopefully you have. The ASX code will be ORP. Why? It's an IPO. So if you want to find out after this conversation about how to download the prospectus, I can't talk this morning, Simon, go to orpheusminerals.com.au/IPO to download the prospectus, because what we're talking about today is an upcoming IPO, but you don't have a lot of time. My apologies. I was trying to get a hold of Simon. He's been pretty busy, but I'm glad you've had some time to come and join me on Small Caps, because it's a pretty exciting time. Everybody out there knows uranium is one of my favorite subjects. And in fact, I recently spoke to Rick Rule. Obviously, Rick loves gold and silver, but uranium, he says, especially with the energy crisis that we find ourselves in, that the uranium space, there's just not enough supply. There's going to be an awful lot of demand. And right now, it's that sweet spot. So, Simon, thanks for joining me today. Orpheus Minerals, give us a brief overview, because you haven't listed yet. Who are you? What are you doing?
Yeah, good morning, Kerry, and thanks for the intro. Great to get that website out there where the prospectus is. I've been told that we've got to flag that pretty strongly. Who am I? So, Simon Mitchell, Managing Director of a new company, Orpheus. Why did I get involved in this, and what's it all about? Well, I actually have a very strong uranium background. I was General Manager of Business Development for Toro Energy with Greg Hall. And did a lot of M&A acquisitions back in the 2000s. So I know the uranium business pretty well, a lot of the actors in it, and I know most of the deposits globally, if you know what I mean. So got a fairly good handle on that. And what we're doing is that we actually believe that we're going into a phase where, you know, it'll make the 2000s boom look like a dress rehearsal, really. This is going to be much, much more profound. And we've put Orpheus together as a very credible vehicle to really invest in uranium with a focus on Australia. And so what we're about, we're an exploration company. We make no bounds about that. Focused on uranium, focused on South Australia and the Northern Territory. It's a specialist business. You know, it's a metal that not many guys have much experience with. And so you do really need to build a very, very good team. And so Orpheus is all about building a really good quality team out there in Australia, looking for the big deposits that the major companies, the major uranium companies, are going to definitely need in the medium term.
In the medium term, that's interesting. I'll come back to that in a moment. You say specialist metals, you're absolutely right. And you mentioned team. Who are they, and why are they excited about what projects you've got? Because I'll get into the projects, but
Yep.
Northern Territory, South Australia, if you're going to be in any jurisdiction, they're pretty good jurisdictions, even globally, aren't they?
Correct. That's right. And look, it's one of those things which, you know, anecdotally, you talk to a lot of fuel buyers or anyone involved in the nuclear industry that's got a fairly good understanding of where uranium's coming from. I mean, there's globally, they would look to, say, the Athabasca Basin in Canada, Kazakhstan, of course, and then you've got the Alligators Rivers region in the Northern Territory and the Frome and Bayman in South Australia, and they're probably the key areas. And when it comes to sourcing uranium from sort of stable jurisdictions, politically stable areas, you know, Canada and Australia are obviously very high on the list with the fuel buyers. So that's important. And, you know, it's one of the reasons why we've pitched our company and we're focusing on that part of the world.
Simon, just before I get into the actual project, because you have got a lot of experience in uranium, you mentioned before that you think that that uranium will become part of the solution, I guess, to the energy crisis. Why is it just the perfect storm coming together? What's your big picture, macro view?
Yeah, so the big macro view is this, that we've spent the last 10 or 15 years, particularly in the West, in trying to pivot to renewable energy. And so a lot of that is about, you'll hear politicians say we're going to do a 100% renewable energy backed up by batteries, etc. And that's very popular with the electors. And so politically, that's been very powerful, and it's been the kind of the dialogue, if you will, of the energy space for quite some time now. And because we've now gone down that route some way, we're about to sort of see stresses in the system, I believe, where it may look a bit subtle initially. We might have little power outages here and there. We'll see very high prices. We're currently in a phase of what I would call the high price environment. So, we haven't yet had the blackouts, but we're seeing the signals through the prices of things like gas, electricity prices increasing by 50% in a year, that sort of thing. In the UK, electricity prices doubled in 6 months. So that's got to send a bit of a signal to the politicians that something's not quite right here. The reason why nuclear power is critical is that it's got the energy density while providing low CO2 emissions. So you fulfill the climate targets that everyone signs up to. In fact, COP27 is in process as we speak. Everyone's going to be talking about low CO2, but I think the conversations of the future are going to be talking about reliability and affordability as opposed to renewable energy. And so when those conversations take place, there's not much you can do other than go down the nuclear path. I'm not suggesting it's going to be 100%, but it's going to certainly be the rock on which everything else is built in a modern electricity system going forward. So we haven't even seen the beginning of this yet, Kerry. It's going to be really fascinating to watch it unfold over the next couple of years. I suspect the next few years are going to be a little bit messy, to be honest, as we try to unwind some of the work that we've done in the last 10, 15 years. And so it's not going to be easy, but the destination, I think, is undeniable. And we're really seeing the very start of it now. And in 5, 6, 7 years' time, I think we'll look back on this and see a real turning point at around about now.
Well, I want to understand the projects that Orpheus Minerals have and why you've chosen them, because they're quite big footprints. Let's go south. Let's start with South Australia.
Yep.
We all know that South Australia is very friendly towards uranium, and in fact, the Honeymoon uranium mine is underway to be restarted. Where are your projects? Why have you chosen them? And why do you think that the audience that's listening to this today should be looking at what you've got with a degree of excitement?
Yeah, look, fundamentally, the Frome and Bayman is one of the best places in Australia to go looking for the paleo channel style uranium.
Okay.
So when you review the prospectus or have a look at our materials on the website, you'll see that we have a strategy of targeting either paleo channel uranium or unconformity uranium. And so the addresses that we've chosen, whether it's the Frome, the Cummins project, or the Mount Douglas project in the Northern Territory, what's driving that is that we are conscious of the sorts of uranium deposit styles that will really be likely to be economic. So in the case of paleo channel uranium, you're talking about in situ recovery. And so while the grade is lower than a conventional unconformity style deposit, the costs of mining are way lower, and the method is very benign, if you will, in terms of environmental impact and so on. And so that's a really good target type. In fact, it's the main way that's uranium is mined in Kazakhstan, for example. So It's been done at scale. It's now accepted in the industry as being one of the main ways to mine uranium. And it's got great, environmental and social outcomes. So I think that's a good way to go. So hence our projects in South Australia. In the Northern Territory, it's a little bit different. That's unconformity style uranium. Grades are high.
What does that mean? What does unconformity style uranium mean? Because
it's sort of a bit of a catch-all to try and give a sense of the genetic model. Funnily enough, the mineralization of that style doesn't actually have to occur in the unconformity. An unconformity is basically a snapshot of a change in time and geological time, Kerry. So you've got rocks of a certain age, and then there was a major geological event, which is a bit like a full stop on a sentence, and then some other rocks were put on top in another geological age, and there's a missing time gap in between the two where lots of stuff happens. And so that's usually the unconformity. So instead of instead of a kind of progressive geology in time, there's like a missing piece. And that's usually, in geological sort of terms, that's often a place where a lot of interesting things happen. So you've got this unconformity, and the rocks that are sitting on top can provide a contrast to those below. And so uranium, well, there's different sort of theories as to why this is the case, what's so-called top-down or bottom-up explanations for the presence of uranium. But basically, the uranium is precipitated as minerals at or close to that unconformity, sometimes above, sometimes below, or even across it. So it's like a benchmark spot, if you will, where the uranium occurs. And so hence the short-term name for it. The actual specifics of each deposit and how the uranium comes to be there can vary from one place to another, but the fundamental principle is the same.
You explained the Paleo Channel, which is your South Australian deposit, and we'll get to that in a second. Is Northern Territory all unconformity? Is that slightly more difficult to A, find, and B, ultimately process?
It's easier in the sense that it's more conventional. So, you've got conventional mining and extraction techniques. Where it can be challenging, particularly in the Northern Territory, is that you've got to deal with a number of cover units. So often the deposits are blind, and so you're drilling through a sandstone cap, if you will, and the action's happening at depth, right? The challenge of the unconformity deposits, which are attractive to the major companies, if you get one that's large enough. My personal view is that you're probably looking at something north of 100 million pounds of uranium for it to be attractive to the majors in an unconformity deposit, particularly if you're talking Alligator Rivers region. In a, say, Paleo Channel system, that number would be quite a lot lower. So your hurdles, if you will, to economic return are easier to attain with the Paleo Channel uranium. So you may be looking there at sort of probably a 20 to 30 million pound minimum, and preferably probably something north of 40 million pounds. But that's still less than half the size of a conventional underground mine. So that's attractive.
Okay, so we spoke right at the start that this is an IPO. You're looking to raise $6 million, 20-cent shares. Where I want to get to, because there's not a lot of time left, where are you at with it? And what's the feedback for you in terms of your projects? What are people saying? That have you got a good footprint? Have you got a good handle on it? And how did you guys get your hands on these projects if they're so good?
Yeah, look, it's something that's been in the making for some years, and the projects were vended to us through guys who actually know uranium very well. In fact, the same team that was behind AR3 and the rare earth play, and that's been a very successful float too, by the way. The same guys, the same technical thinkers that were behind that were behind the uranium play in South Australia. The Mount Douglas project in the Northern Territory is a little bit different. That's actually the brainchild of a guy called Jeff Upini, who's one of our technical advisors. For those of you who don't know him, he looks like a cranky guy on the website. But he's a lovely guy, don't get me wrong. But he's a 50-year plus veteran of the uranium game in the Northern Territory. And this is the Mount Douglas project is probably the favourite of the technical team, because we're really looking at first-class geology, but in a context which hasn't really been appreciated for it. So I'm sure we'll get a little bit more detail of the projects later. But basically, we've had uranium experts generate the projects over the last couple of years. And in the main, they are taking some stock in the IPO. So, they're going to be part of the journey, if you will. So we like the addresses, big size footprints over the top of these addresses, and potential for the sorts of deposit styles that are going to be attractive to the majors should we be successful in finding some.
The offer, the prospect of the offer will close in approximately a week's time. I want to know, what's the use of the funds? What are you going to tackle first? And ladies and gentlemen, if I can just explain very quickly, in the Northern Territory. I think you've got 4 projects, is that right? And 2 in South Australia?
That's right. Yeah. Although 3 of the 4 in the Northern Territory are under application, Kerry. So we talk about 3 projects that have been fully granted and ready for work day one. The 3 applications, one of those 3 called Woolner, I expect that to be granted relatively quickly post IPO. The other 2 will take a little bit longer to navigate because we have to deal with the Aboriginal people in those areas, and going through the Aboriginal clearance system takes some time in the Northern Territory, as you can appreciate.
So does that mean that post IPO, your focus will be on Mount Douglas, which you spoke about?
Correct.
That's what Jeff Upini has been working on for quite some time?
Exactly. And so that's a really, really interesting project. And essentially what we're looking at Mount Douglas, Kerry, is that most of the sort of big uranium mines in Australia have occurred in what's called the Alligator Rivers region, which is sort of up in the top northeast corner of the Northern Territory. The geology that we're seeing around Mount Douglas is sort of a parallel to the geology that is seen up there, including that unconformity, by the way. You know how I mentioned the unconformity before? What we've got is a deeper level of erosion at Mount Douglas. And so we've just got the remnants sort of cover sandstone there. So we're closer to the action, if you will, at Mount Douglas. And we've got good radiation anomalies to chase up. We've chipped, up to 1,000 ppm uranium on the ground there in sort of very preliminary traverses. So we love that area. We think it ticks a lot of technical boxes, and it's had nowhere near the same level of exploration as the Alligators Rivers region. So it's one of the reasons why Jeff wanted to get in there. It's a first-class location.
So post IPO, is are you going to go up? Have you got drill rigs? What happens?
Yeah, so initially we've got to do some initial sort of scouting work, if you will, and a bit of mapping and things like that. So appreciate that it's dry season access only. Not quite yet ready for drilling. We possibly will do some trenching in some of the areas where we're seeing uranium on surface, but that depends a little bit on discussions with landowners and things like that. But we would like to be able to be drilling at Mount Douglas in the first year, access willing, so to speak. So that's certainly one of the objectives of getting in there as fast as possible. The other project where we hope possibly to be drilling, certainly on the road verges and things like that, is down in the Cummins project on the Eyre Peninsula.
Okay.
You will see, Kerry, very conservatively, I've put drilling at the Mount Frome project in the second year. So in the prospectus, notwithstanding we could drill at Frome project literally tomorrow, we've quite deliberately flagged that to the market that's in year 2. And the reason for that is that we're dealing with the Andamutna people, the native title holders of that area. And, we've got to go through processes with the Andamutna people, which will take some time. And so I wanted to flag that with investors. Now, they're probably the question behind people's minds as well, what's the chance of you not getting an agreement? Well, the thing to point out is that the uranium mines in that area, Boss Energy's Honeymoon mine, the Beverley 4 Mile mines, these are all on Andamutna ground, which should tell people that, at the end of the day, if you're patient, you engage in good faith with the Aboriginal people, you can get to the destination that you need to, but you've got to get off on the right foot. And so hence my little bit of conservatism there and suggesting that we won't drill there until the second year.
I think being conservative is probably a good thing, but it is important also to note that you are relatively close to other uranium mines in the area. And I know Honeymoon is about to do a restart. And so they understand, I guess, the value of these sorts of projects. Would that be correct?
Yeah, look, I think it's what's the word? You can look across Australia, Kerry, and not all Aboriginal people are pro-uranium mining. Let's put it that way. There are certain parts of Australia that would be very problematic.
Okay.
But certainly the Frome and Bayman area, that's not one of them. So that's actually one area where outcomes can be achieved, albeit through processes that might take a little bit of time. Similarly, in a similar vein, the Cummins project's in southern Eyre Peninsula, and we're going to be needing to deal with freehold farming communities. right? So that brings its own challenges, sort of challenges of a different sort. But needless to say, you obviously need to engage in good faith with people to make sure that, you know, everyone's on the same page when you're trying to move forward.
Going back again to when you are listed, you've got the funds in the bank, percentage wise, because you've got Northern Territory, you've got South Australia. Are they going to be equally loved, or will the focus be more on Mount Douglas in the Northern Territory at the start?
Yeah. Roughly speaking, we're raising $6 million. $2 million will be spent on the ground in the South Australian projects and about $1 million in the Northern Territory. So that's a sort of 2/3, 1/3 sort of thing. However, very important to point out to investors that if they have a look at the use of funds, they'll see something a little bit unusual. We have $1 million set aside for project generation. And that's often not really flagged by new companies, but that's actually a really important part of our business model. And what's that about? Well, we've got people like Jeff Upini and another person, Dr. David Rawlings, who's another of our technical advisors. They're going to be working on new project areas. And I suspect a good chunk of that will be in the Northern Territory, Kerry. So what's that about? Well, really what that's about is that we have certain concepts about areas of Australia that have not seen uranium exploration since the oil majors came in through the 1970s. So
Wow.
these might be sort of unloved basins or geology that hasn't really been recognised for uranium potential for probably on 50 years. And so we've got a few ideas about how we're going to go down that path. Can't go into too much detail, obviously, on a presentation like this. But basically, though, what we're looking to do is Orpheus is really just, in a sense, a seed company that's going to be building into a significant uranium business with people who understand uranium and with an expanding project profile going forward. So it's not just about those projects that you see in the prospectus. It's about something that's going to be growing significantly over the next couple of years.
Well, look, I'll probably talk to you a little bit offline as well, because there's so much we pretty much haven't covered, but we're running out of time.
Yes.
How would we sum this all up? Everyone knows I love to do this, which is give us our beautiful community out there, give them 3 reasons why they should be sitting up and taking notice. And as I said at the start, ladies and gentlemen, there's only a week before this closes. Actually, before I get to the 3, they download the prospectus, who's the lead broker, how do they, if they're excited about this, how do they get involved?
Okay. So if they're an Argonaut shareholder, there's a priority offer to Argonaut shareholders. So some of the stock is essentially reserved for them. Not all of that may be taken up by Argonaut shareholders, but the allocation's been made. The other half is being run by Taylor Collison. So Taylor Collison's a broker based out of here in Adelaide. And so we have what's called the broker firm and general public offer. So even if you've got no association with Argonaut Resources and you're just somebody who loves the uranium sector and want to get involved, you would fill in the general public offer.
Okay.
And no doubt other investors will be knocked on the door of by Taylor Collison if they haven't already, to be honest. So we've been doing presentations to institutional investors, and actually, anecdotally, Kerry, that's something that's been very interesting to me, is the institutional interest in this uranium play is very strong. And it's very interesting to me because I used to be involved in gold exploration, and attracting the interest of the majors in an early stage gold company
Doesn't
was,
happen.
institutional investment was very hard to secure.
Mm-hmm.
I've had less issue with that with uranium, interestingly enough. And I think what that's about is that they can sort of see the energy crisis, the energy thematic that's coming through, and they know there's a storm brewing, and then in the medium term, in the next few years, this is going to be talking about this a lot over the next few years. So I suspect we're at the early stages of a sector that's going to be getting pretty hot.
Well, yes, I tend to agree with you. All right, let's wrap it up. 3 reasons why they should be sitting up and taking notice of Orpheus Minerals pretty much over the next week.
Yeah, okay. So what I would offer, Kerry, is that, and then for those who have been monitoring uranium, they would have seen in recent months, several listings that have done Australian companies that are going across to the Athabasca Basin in Canada to do exploration. And nothing wrong with that. I fully, hats off to people that give that a crack. So Athabasca Basin's a first-class location to go looking for high-grade uranium, no doubt about it. But there are also only a couple other places globally where you would do something similar. One would be the Alligator or the Pine Creek origin in the Northern Territory, such as the Alligator Rivers region in the Northern Territory, or the Frome and Bayman in South Australia. So these are two sort of first-class uranium districts recognised by the uranium fuel buyers as fantastic places for projects. Right on our doorstep, Kerry. I'm an Australian. I've got an Australian company. I'm going to do some work in Australia, but in the best parts of Australia. So I see Orpheus as being, hopefully be seen as, high quality uranium exploration play, specialised in uranium, and focused on the right areas.
All right.
Now, that was my first one, wasn't it?
That's the first one. Give me number 2 and 3, but make it quick.
Okay. Look, what I would say is not only are we looking in the right places, in the right jurisdictions, we've also got projects which are conceptually really compelling. And our footprints in those areas are very large. So we haven't got postage stamp size targets where we're going to go out and drill half a dozen drill holes. We are looking at key geological province scale stuff, looking for a major deposit. And the reason for that is we want to be attracted to the majors at the end of the day.
Okay.
So we're not looking for a small, £5 million deposit or something like that. We are after something that's substantial and will be attractive to the majors at the end of the day. And you said I had 3, Kerry, so I'll slip in the third one. How do you make all that work? Okay, so you're looking in the right places, looking for the right style, getting the right scale of deposit, but you really need the right people. I know you hear that all the time. You probably get that all the time. The team is the number one thing. In uranium, it's absolutely critical. You said at the beginning of the presentation, it's like a specialist metal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's right. It is a specialist business. And there's a lot of traps for young players in uranium. I would be a bit suspicious of companies that have uranium in their list as number 4 or 5. Sure, they might have some uranium potential, but do they have the team to execute, I would ask you. In Orpheus, we've got a first-class uranium team, and we're going to be building it over the next sort of 6 months. So we're going to have probably one of the better field crews in Australia out there looking for uranium deposits. We think we're pretty exciting, and we hope investors will have a good look.
Well, you mentioned Jeff Upini at the start and through the conversation, and I know if anyone understands uranium in this country more than Jeff Upini, I'd like to meet them, because this guy absolutely understands it, and he's up there in the Northern Territory, and I believe he's pretty excited. Now, there is the wind is in the sails of uranium, ladies and gentlemen. We know that there's an energy crisis. Simon just spoke about it. Will that lift all boats? I suspect it possibly will. It's certainly what Rick Rule's been talking about recently. So Orpheus Minerals, ASX code ORP. Go and get the prospectus. As I said at the start, you need to go to orpheusminerals.com.au/IPO. It's all there. And I'm sure if you reach out to Simon Mitchell as the managing director, if you've got any questions, sure he'd be happy to share to answer any questions you might have. But for now, thanks for joining me on Small Caps, Simon. And once it's all up and running, make sure you come back and give us some updates.
Absolutely, Kerry. And thanks very much for your time.